Great.
All righty, so we're on item C, which is approval of the agenda. Could I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Everybody who is in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you very much. So that motion carries. So we're on to the next item, which is D, the first public comment.
All right, let me see if we have any attendees that are willing to participate. As of right now, I'm only seeing CTN, but maybe we'll give them a few moments just in case. I am not seeing anyone waiting to speak.
All right, great. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, from the September meeting. Thank you, Stephanie, for sending those out. Could I get a motion to approve the September minutes?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Peter. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. And could, are there any changes to the minutes at all? I should have asked that before I asked for approval. Okay, great. So everybody that approves the minutes, say aye.
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 Thank you. So that motion carries. So now we're on to our regular business, the agenda items.
All right, so this time around, we decided, Stephanie and I decided and talked about it, to invert the agenda because we kept getting to the end and having this problem where we couldn't even get to the content. So we decided to switch it around for this time so we could get to the large conversational items that we had been tabling for so long. So that is the reasoning behind that. So the first one, and we could change the order with which we want to talk about this. It just depends on what people want to do. But the first one would have been, or could still be, the producer only rule clarification, which had been worked on previous to the pandemic.
Right. So Stephanie, do you want to summarize what you see as the primary issues, especially since Eric wasn't here for those conversations?
Sure, yes. So there are some, we'll call them gray areas of our producer only rule, because if you look at the rules themselves, it's pretty vague in terms of the wording. The specific wording, and let me pull it back up at the same time from the rules, it says sort of, it doesn't really specify details. It basically just says that, and this is in section 5.1, subsection B, it says all food and products offered for sale at the market must be grown or made by the vendor who offers the product for sale. So I think a lot of this conversation came about before, meaning, what does it mean to be grown if someone is saying getting plants from a greenhouse, how many weeks does it have to actually be cared for before it can be considered producer only? I know that's one part of it. And then the other part is there are some gray area vendors that would sort of fall under this category of not quite employee of the original producer, but sort of a contractor. But that's all that they sell. So like, how does that fit in? So really it was just sort of making sure that, that we don't have just a bunch of exceptions to the rule, and that this producer only thing, doesn't get watered down, and that we are really kind of defining, the fact that we have this, the fact that this is something that makes our market unique, and sort of all of those things that fall into that category. I don't know if that's a very short summary, but feel free to chime in, anyone else.
I'd like to just chime in.
Go ahead.
I think Stephanie did a really good job summarizing some of the key issues. And I think, one of the best things about our market, and one of the things that makes me proud to be a vendor, is the fact that it is producer only. And like, we started this conversation before, but I think that further breaking it down and clarifying what that could mean would be helpful for vendors and for customers. I think that over the years, just everyone sort of interprets it differently. And so I think, you could have one person who's selecting vendors, thinking it means one thing and then another. And the confusion just sort of adds, I feel like, does not help with, I don't know, maybe how the market's perceived. And I think it's really important for partly for that reason. And also just so we don't continue maybe going down some paths that we don't necessarily want to based on precedent, but maybe we have an opportunity to really define what we want going forward. It does not have to necessarily be based on historically what we have had, but maybe like, what is our ideal? Like, what are we really seeking in the vendors and our products that we want? I also think that, and I don't know if Stephanie wants the commission's input on this, but I think that reviewing our inspection process could be beneficial. Just, how are we ensuring that vendors are doing, as they say, producing their own products? Because I think that when there is doubt that it's happening, that really creates a lot of just problems at the market in terms of like, it just doesn't feel good to be a vendor with like that doubt hanging in the air. And I think if we had maybe a better inspection process and a more clear definition, I think that the overall like morale would be a lot better. So those were some of the reasons I felt pretty strongly that it would just be nice to have this conversation further and really set some guidelines in writing. And if that looks like something we do at our monthly meeting, that's great. But also, I had thought maybe doing a special committee, this might be a great opportunity for that too, because we haven't had a committee look at something before, but I think that it requires a lot of delving into and talking about it. So as another idea, not that we have to, but yeah.
Great, Stephanie, thanks. Does anybody else want to comment on anything? Then we can go into discussion.
And I just wanted to clarify, maybe should have mentioned this, that we're not changing anything for producers, specifically farmers or artisans. I mean, they're always going to have to be the producers of their stuff. This is specifically a conversation of people in the gray area and how we can address that moving forward, especially because we already have vendors that are in the market, right, that are sort of in a gray area, and we certainly want to keep them in the market, and we don't want that to be perpetuated as if it's sort of like a negative thing. This is a positive focus. And it is also to help market staff in terms of if questions arise about, oh, well, producer only, what does this person have? And what does that person have? And I mean, the inspection process is of course part of it, but that might even be like its own conversation because of, previous conversations and, how do we verify, right? If people aren't being the producer, that's a whole nother issue of difficulty. Because again, I know there's a lot of allegations that people always have, but there's been really short on evidence coming up. So I agree with Stephanie that we probably would need to change the format of the inspection in terms of like surprise inspections, not pre-scheduling things might be one way, but that perhaps may be a separate sort of bullet point on its own in this conversation.
Although one of my understandings was that the clarifying some of the guidelines would be also to help the inspector have more guidance on the process as well. And Stephanie, I know you had said that Alex was doing some of the inspections, so it'd be great to get his input on I think those gray areas that you talked about, to give us some idea of some of the specific issues that are coming up. And that doesn't mean to postpone it, but just we can identify some things and then get some input from Alex since he is doing those inspections.
Sure. I just don't know that he's done enough as of now, especially because he's been on his break for the last 2 months. To like have an opinion about that, but for sure we can always ask him when he comes back in November.
I guess another point with this too is that it's kind of as a positive incentive too, in terms of if there are clear guidelines and clear boundaries, then it can say that, hey, I'm a producer and I want to do plants. Well, then that entails that I don't want to go into a gray area because it's a gray area. But if it's like, well, if we make a gray area pretty clear, and it's like, if you do this and this, you're not in a gray area, you're set. If you do this, you're not set. So just, so making those things as crystal clear as possible potentially does increase the diversity we get at the market too, because then producers are more empowered to produce things that, that might be in the gray area, but not in a non-gray way, so that we get more of what we seek in that way. So versus just deterring everyone like, I don't even want to touch that area because it potentially might get in trouble. It's a naughty issue. So I'm just going to move away from that.
Sure. And I think it also sometimes can put like a double burden on producers that like per se value added producers don't have. Whereas, as long as they can say, I'm blending 2 items together, this is a product I made, versus if you're just putting 1 item in a bag, you know what I'm saying? And again, there's like, I don't know if there ever won't be a gray area in certain aspects. And the other big one, of course, is plants. Right. And I know there's already people bringing tropical plants. And again, obviously, these are things that are not being started from seed, but are being brought in from elsewhere. And the vendors that do this already are going off of like what the commission had talked about before in terms of how many weeks, those plants need to be cared for at a greenhouse before they are allowed to be brought to market. And then that's the other thing that becomes very confusing is because we have these rules that other markets don't, it's the question of constraining the capacity, and like making sure that people are only bringing X plants to one market and not the other. So then it becomes incredibly complex from an enforcement standpoint as well. So
I remember the other one too was with like livestock in terms of if someone gets chicks and then they raise them, when did they get them and when did they sell them? The other one too I remember was like the honey complexity in terms of, does the honey actually live in Michigan? Well, some of the year it's in Florida, and so is that a local product, and is that, so it's like, so there are and we resolve some of those, but it's just as an example of some of these kind of nuanced areas of products that we want, but making sure that we can get something that's not just someone buys to the left and just sells to the right, and just arbitrage. We're not looking for that.
For sure. And I'm also pretty cognizant, like I don't want to put any undue burden on vendors, because again, if people are doing things by industry standard and we say, no, you can't do that, they're going to have to incur a lot more cost to be able to do some of these things, which then may put them at a disadvantage and may make it so that they can't come to market. So it's a very delicate balance. So in terms of like feeder animals, very few people are raising all of their own animals from the very moment that they exist, right? That's very rare. Same thing with plugs. That's very rare that you're getting a vendor. I think we maybe have one that I can think of that does every single seed for their plants themselves. So that's another thing I think we need to be aware of too, that we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And we also definitely need to support our vendors as well. So
Stephanie, I was curious if, since the commission last talked about the plants and how long you should be raising them before you can sell them, has that come up?
I freeze?
Huh?
Sorry, I froze. What did you say?
I was wondering if it has come up as a question from vendors since we talked about it before.
Which specific part? Just the producer only piece, or
No,
which
sorry,
part of
the plant part. So, how
it?
long
Yeah.
you're supposed to have
Yeah.
them before selling? Mhm.
Yep, it's definitely come up. And
Okay.
I think it's sort of an ongoing question
Okay.
that people still have. Or
Okay.
people saying, I just want to make sure that this is okay. I'm following XYZ protocol. I just wanted to check, so it's more of that in that context that it's come up.
Mhm.
So
So
yeah.
do you think that the guidelines we came up with before need to be like added to or changed?
I just don't know if people have access to those or if that's ever really been shared with newer vendors. I just don't know what the status is of that.
Mhm.
Because also, like, I think it was a conversation that didn't really go beyond just a discussion phase. Like, or am I wrong on that? Was there something that got, approved and codified in some way?
I think there is a document that did get approved. That's like a tool for the, sorry, another thing I didn't get to show you, but maybe you've seen it. A tool for the manager to use when talking to new vendors or potential vendors.
Sure.
Yeah, that outlines it, but it never got like published or sent out.
So Stephanie Willett, I'm looking at the document this last I have, it was from February of 2020. So in those before times. And that's where we'd put in, you had done a great job of summarizing a lot of issues. And then it's the other thing that we talked about is that there's checklists for not a required practice, but suggested to sort of encourage people to follow our ideal guidelines, but recognizing that might not be possible. But there were still a couple things that we were talking about, like on the honey, there's something on cheese, those might not be a big deal. The plants and seedlings, there's a little bit of red on here for that I think we were yet to talk about. But the main questions, one of the things that you put on there was about soap and body products, and the rest of this looks pretty straightforward. The other question was about the plants and seedlings. Do producers need to have their own greenhouse and equipment? That was the other thing that was on the list.
Okay. Well, I think, and part of it too is, we created this as a tool mostly for the manager because Stephanie, you're the one who is having to answer a lot of these questions and make those decisions. So, the question is, what is helpful to you right now?
Sure. And, quite frankly, looking over the draft before, I think some aspects of it are way too overly specific. Because again, it comes to an enforcement thing. And if we're only having people inspected once every other year, how are we going to verify, for example, that honey producers are performing, 3 of the following activities, right? And so that's sort of like another concern that I kind of had with that. And then also like having to own your own equipment, how does that impact somebody that's maybe using a commercial kitchen, right? And has all the licensing, but don't own all their stuff, for example, right? For like in the case of cheese, I know that's in there. So those are some questions that I had, even within at least the document as I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I think those are really good questions, which is, I think, partly why I wanted to go back and revisit this, I think. And also why
Sure.
in my mind it is tied to the inspection process. And that is a big conversation. And like you said, maybe something we need to do separately. And unfortunately, we only have these meetings once a month. But the question is, can we enforce the specifics that we are creating? How do we know that's the case? And I think it all boils down to that. And so Do we look at doing our inspections differently in order to be able to answer these questions better? Or do we make it more vague or easier to comply? I don't know. I think I'd have to look at each category specifically to be able to decide something like that. But yeah, it's hard. It was a really difficult thing as the manager to make a lot of those decisions. And I think it's nice to have something to guide, because I don't think anything like this existed before I was manager. So.
Sure, and I'm not saying like we shouldn't have anything. I just feel like it's a little bit too involved, and knowing the inspections task team that we currently have, I don't think that they have the ability to sort of figure some of these things out, right? Because that would assume that everyone has in-depth knowledge of everything from like honey extraction to value added stuff. And it's like, I might know that, but I don't really have the capacity personally to go out and inspect either. So that's, I guess, really the question then becomes like, what is our end goal and how do we want to get there? Do we want to create a system that is, yes, making sure that the producer only thing is intact, but also like not being exclusionary to people either, right? It's sort of like that delicate balance. And I think a lot of it too is, with Ralph's passing, the reality really is what's going to happen when a lot of our, elder vendors either retire or don't have a succession plan, and like, how are we really going to attract other farms? I don't want to be known as that market that's like impossible to get into, so no one even tries. But then again, I'm not saying it should just be a free-for-all, but like we need to have that sort of in the back of the mind too, I think. Because that's a reality for, unfortunately, a large majority of our larger produce and orchard farms.
Yeah, I think it is a good point that a lot of people will be phasing out, and we need to be thinking about that. That's definitely a good point. But can you give an example? I guess I don't understand. Yeah, an example of what that would mean to be less specific, what you were saying. I don't know what that means.
Well, I'm just, just going based off of the guidelines, right? Like requiring people to own a certain amount of things, I think is sort of really problematic, especially for smaller operations that may just be getting started and don't have the capital to be able to do that. Whereas a lot of it is sort of like privileging the really large farms that, quite frankly, either at market already or really no longer exist. So I think we also need to be able to be dynamic and be able to bring on smaller produce farms that may not have access to land in a more permanent basis, right?
No,
so that's just
absolutely.
one example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we were trying to get at too with that was not contracting out, not having someone else basically grow it and then you do the last step and harvest it or something and bring it to market or something like that. So the fear was, or the thought was, if you own your own equipment, then someone else isn't going to be doing the work, is less likely to be doing that work for you. So if there's another way to get at that than ownership of equipment, then I think that should be explored. So like, that's a great example of.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I think is like, if that's really like what you said is the goal, we need to have it say that. We shouldn't do like a roundabout way that might unintentionally exclude people because we're concerned about something, that might be a result of that, and I'd feel more comfortable doing like what you said, which was like making sure that someone's not reselling, right? And verifying for us that that is the case. And I don't necessarily think that like, having somebody that's really brand new showing us their ownership or their receipts or something is really necessarily go towards that. Plus, it kind of sends a strange message. And that's the other part of this. It's like, I don't want to legislate based from a place of mistrust, right? I want it to be based off on like, we trust our vendors. That's why they're here. Because I think, and again, it's a large bunch of vendors. It's hard sometimes for everyone to be honest, but I think we need to come from that standpoint instead of like, oh, what if all of these negatives happen? Let's have all these contingencies, which are very unlikely. You know what I mean? Because then it puts an undue burden on the inspector. It puts an undue burden on the finances of market, given just how many hours we would have to pay for the inspection to happen on all these extra aspects. So, you know, I think in the long term, those are other things that, you know, I think about when we're having this conversation too.
I think that some of the main things that are the biggest issue are the plants. Anybody who's selling meat, that sort of thing. I think that's where the gray areas are. I think of course, it's all up to determination by you, Stephanie. But I would say, this is my opinion. I believe we decided on 2 weeks with the plants, and like I said, like you said, I don't know that it got finalized. My suggestion was 2 weeks. To take care of something in the greenhouse for 2 weeks is, you know, substantial. And then the other thing is I can finish petunias in 2 weeks, probably a little less actually. If I bought some plugs and planted them, turned the heat up and took good care of them, I can finish them in 2 weeks. So it's not uncommon to finish bedding plants in 2 weeks from a seedling. Any kind of pest problem that you might endure is going to surface within 2 weeks. Personally, I feel like that's a pretty solid timeline to have. That's my own opinion. And then, like, as far as the meat and stuff goes, my opinion on that is it okay for me to buy a cow and have it killed and buy it and it's already killed and then I butcher it myself? I would say, I mean, you could call that a gray area, but as long as I was doing that major step of it, I think that would be, personally, I think that would be acceptable. I don't know exactly how the rules read right now. Would it be okay for me to drive to the butcher shop and buy it already all packaged up and then bring it to market and slap a price tag on it? No. But as long as you're doing a step in that's involving some effort and some investment with your time and some knowledge, I think that would be the important thing to look for as far as any of that goes. I don't believe it's right to say anyone has to own anything, and I don't know that it does. I think the rules basically say I could go rent a greenhouse from Stephanie right now, and as long as I was the one taking care of the stuff in it, I think that, and we had a contract, I think that would, not a contract, but like a lease agreement for the greenhouse, I think that that's acceptable. There's no problem with that, I don't think. Again, these are just my opinions. I'm just telling you guys what I'm thinking while we're talking about all this stuff. Obviously, farm ground is leased all the time. A lot of people, somebody could even live in the city and farm some ground. As far as equipment goes, I could borrow. There have been a lot of times when something breaks and you call your neighbor and, hey, can I borrow a tractor? My tractor is getting fixed, or I don't even have one right now. I need to buy a new one. And you borrow the neighbor's tractor. There's no problem there from what I can see. And those are just some of my opinions as I'm sitting here thinking about, listening to everyone talk. I don't know that I don't know what we could do to adjust it. Can you steer us a little more in that direction, what you're thinking, Stephanie?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this came about because a lot of people had asked a question about, let's revisit that conversation we had before and let's iron out the details. And in terms of the document, like, it does say buy or lease land, but it definitely says use your own equipment. So I think that's another really great point you bring up, that that's not necessarily realistic in all situations. But again, so I don't know, maybe what Stephanie was saying is a good idea. Maybe we should go to a subcommittee and have more in-depth conversations about, what makes sense, what's helpful, what's unnecessary. Because again, I think a lot of the previous rules that we've been working with, previous to both of us, come from a very, very draconian standpoint from my perspective, right? It's coming from a place of punishing people without transgression actually really happening, instead of like, we need to sort of, I don't know, to me, I want vendors to feel like we trust them, because they know how to run their businesses, and I don't want to create like a punitive system beyond, again, if someone breaks the rule or messes up, obviously there should be some consequences. I'm not saying that. But I just don't necessarily think we should have this like 10 bullet point thing on each different product that would disqualify a lot of potential applicants. So I guess maybe the question is further conversations in a subcommittee, or maybe even vendors weighing in on this, and what maybe if vendors think that like, is there something that we need to clarify for them, that would be helpful too. I think maybe I don't know, I would like to see it come from that standpoint. So maybe keep what was worked on before as a draft in the back pocket, and then maybe, revisit this once we've talked to other vendors in terms of what they would like to see clarified. Because again, maybe half of this stuff is like things worth thinking about, but has never been a scenario that has ever come up. So I'm not sure, but that's sort of what I would think in terms of deepening the conversation and steering it towards something that is useful, for everyone.
Eric, did you have something to add?
I think what I was going to add ask was more specific, so I'll leave it for now. I was going to agree with what Jeff said and then just ask a question about meat specifically, but I don't know that that's relevant right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here's my suggestion on going forward is I've actually heard a lot of people talking about the overall goals of what producer only should be. And so I think the document that we worked on drafting in the before times, I think it would be useful to think about or to have something drafted about what the goals are of producer only. And you all talked about a lot of those general ideas about what makes the Ann Arbor Farmers Market special because it is producer only. And so Stephanie, I hear what you're saying about not wanting it punitive. So maybe we start from that positive place of, this is the goal of the producer only market. And we have a very long history of having a producer only market. And then, and what Jeff was saying about, producer only means that the people who are at the market are those that are putting effort into creating what they have to sell at the market. And then think about what of the document is too specific. So like for meat, I am looking at it and we had talked about needing to raise something for at least half of its life. So, but Jeff just brought up an interesting context of, if you did your own butchering and packaging, how would that fit into the scenario? So thinking about getting especially feedback from specific vendors on those sections that are really related to what they're doing, I think also might be a good position to be in. So
And yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to go ahead.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, just to clarify, all vendors that sell meat have to be USDA at market. It's got to be a USDA facility. People cannot be at their farm slaughtering. I mean, you can do on-farm slaughter if you're having people purchase it direct there, but everyone's got to be USDA, and we have all of their licensing paperwork and information about the slaughterhouses or abattoirs rather that they're using. So just want to, before that got a little too
that's
sideways,
fine.
I just wanted to clarify that moment.
That was, yeah, I didn't mean someone could just butcher something at their kitchen table. I meant
I knew what you meant, Jeff, but
yeah,
I wasn't sure others knew what you meant.
One other thing I'm going to bring up that a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but it's something that's always kind of bothered me. I think that the people can use the market as a tool to promote their CSA. Am I correct?
What do you mean? by
So
use
you
as a
guys have,
tool?
I think there's even a CSA day, correct? Like, hey, go to this farmer and get your CSA package.
There used to be, we haven't done it since the pandemic. There really wasn't that much interest for this year. The most we did is that there is a page on the website where people can click on it and see like who's offering a CSA. That's as
Okay.
far as we've gone. Or if
Well,
it's somebody that I see it online and I'll like share the sign up information for everybody.
Yeah, no, there's no problem there. My question is, let's say I offered a CSA. Okay, and I draw these people in with, hey, come get my box of goodies. And then
Good point.
I'm advertising that I'm putting some stuff in there. Let's say I'm putting bananas and oranges in it. Like,
Mhm.
is that okay? I mean,
No.
am I selling that at market? That's a gray area I think that needs to be looked at as well. Just because it looks bad on the market. If there's somebody who's offering something in their CSA box, and it's almost like a loophole to buy and sell at the market, to a certain extent. And that's just kind of how I felt about it. So I think maybe while we're looking at all this, that's something that we could kind of look at as well, just so that everything's cut and dry and there's no gray areas there as well.
Sure, and yeah, I was gonna say, just to clarify, Tantre, for example, has two separate CSAs. They have their immune booster box, which is what they partner with a lot of other businesses, and that is never available at market. That's only for pickup at the food hub. And then their other one is just like their produce 100% grown by them. But you're right, like we need to at least tell people that that's expectation and not just expect farms to like do the right thing, for example.
Right. Well, honestly, the person I'm thinking of who was the biggest offender of that isn't even at the market anymore. They don't even come to market. And I think Tantre is very good at following the rules for the market. And I think he
Yeah.
really has, I was
just giving an example.
No, I get it. But the person I was thinking of isn't even there anymore. So it's not even an issue currently. I don't think I don't look in everyone's boxes, but it's just something that I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point for sure. And I think, CSAs unfortunately are becoming less popular over the last few years. I think maybe because there's just so many other options. But I agree that's maybe something that we should write into this as sort of a sidebar for producer only, just reminding people that CSAs available at market are just produced by them. And if you're going to have an aggregated CSA, you're just going to have a different pickup location. I think that's pretty cut and dry.
I guess if I could add something in too, that I keep hearing it's kind of there are three areas we're trying to make this work in terms of the consumer view of having these being producer only, and that what the consumers see, and that's sometimes different than what the farmers who are there, who maybe know more of how the processes work and what's likely there. So that the consumer view, the morale of the market for particularly the producers, in terms of if they feel if something's unfair because someone is not doing the work and someone else, and well, I'm doing the work, so that making sure that's important. And then producer clarity in terms of what can the producers actually do, and what is kind of what's going to fly and what doesn't, which goes against it. And so having some clarity. Also, I hear within this that with those kind of three goals that there are a lot of hypotheticals in terms of as to things that someone could do, and we can try to write all the rules to try to encapsulate strictly everything in all futures, which is a very hard task and often will be very rigid and very difficult to enforce. And so the other way to do it is kind of it's like a procedural justice kind of thing too, in terms of if there were like someone says, let's say it's like we're an ombudsman or something, where like if someone says that someone makes a anonymous or private issue and says, okay, I think something's going on here, have some mechanism on which that there's a question is raised, a transparent process is discussed, that result is shared, and that there's a clear call in terms of no, you can't do that, or yes, you can. and that's then resolved, and that helps for the producers, that helps for the morale in terms of it's like this is fair, and that also helps for the consumers in terms of the consumer. If a consumer could potentially say something like, hey, this doesn't apply, I'm getting bananas in my CSA, then that, okay, that's something to investigate, and that might actually help to narrow down what you're talking about with the overhead issue. Because if we, every 6 months or every 3 months have surprise inspections of everyone in all this way, it's just like, it's so much to do versus tracking down based on a some random and some specifically or some regularly scheduled and some specific inquiries about like, hey, we've received some notice that this might be a little off. Can we discuss? And I think that might be a more efficient way to handle it. And also, again, but with it also being transparent, so that those results are shared. It's not just like purely between the market manager and and it's a dicey thing, because it'd be nice if it were like, hey, this has been investigated. We clarified, in fact, it clarified kind of what we're looking for. It's like it's like case law in some ways, but it's like, here's a little section. This is what the question was. This is what the determination was. And here's kind of the reasoning. And that doesn't mean it's like, it has to be exactly like that every time, but it sets some sort of a kind of rolling standard. And that might be the living document that kind of goes through this of like, well, we had this happen to this time, this had this time, this. Okay, I have some idea of the narrative of how that goes. That might be a more time efficient and fairer and more adaptive too. As things change, come on, it's like, well, these are extenuating circumstances. Everyone's extenuating circumstances. That's always the way it's going to be. Everyone is special in that way. And I think that's reasonable. So.
Thanks for that, Peter. So here's my suggestion on how we move forward on this is, Stephanie, if you could maybe think about writing what the goal is for producer only, and thinking about those general things about, it's an idea that the producers that are at the market have put some effort, a fair amount of their effort and creativity into the process of creating what they have at market. I think Peter's good idea about having a process of if there are complaints at the market, I think it would be good to have something written out about the complaint so that there's a document of it and a process for thinking about how that would then be resolved. Does it mean a surprise inspection? Does the market manager take care of it? Any and all of those possibilities. And then Stephanie, if you could also take the draft document and identify those things that you think are exclusionary and way too specific. I think that would be helpful. And my suggestion is that either we all look at that next meeting, or we decide now that goes to a subcommittee and the subcommittee can work on it and tweak it and figure out the process for getting potentially some vendor input. And then it comes back to us for a sort of final review. So that's two different options.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say, I do think we need to be careful about documenting complaints and responses, just not to create a toxic culture around that. If there's someone who the complaint is about, we don't want it to, become, like Stephanie was saying, we want it to be positive. And in a lot of these cases, I think when complaints would come to me, it was kind of important to keep the identity of the vendor quiet until we were able to resolve a lot of these things or figure out, like, is this true, is it not, that kind of thing. So just be aware of that.
But would you all, you two people who have been market managers, would it be helpful for you to have the complaint written out? So again, it would be kept private, but it would be written out instead of the, lots of talking that happens at the market. So, and you don't have to resolve this now. I just want to bring that up, that, if somebody's going to lobby a complaint, it makes them commit to that complaint if they have to write it down on paper, even if it's just go into the office and take 3 minutes and write it down. So anyways, that's a suggestion. We can all think on this because we only have 45 minutes left,
Yeah.
but Stephanie Stauffer, how would you like to go? Would you like to write up a document, give it to us again, or do you want to have it go into subcommittee? Because I think this is ultimately going to be you having to organize this.
I mean, you know, the subcommittee I think could be helpful in that we could bring on other vendors, right? It doesn't just have to be PMAC, right? We can bring on other people that have concerns about this specific issue. Again, who knows? Maybe you don't want to bring on other vendors, but that could be a really good way to get other people's feedback and maybe pick some new brains that haven't necessarily been thinking about this at the level of detail this body has been. So I think that could be helpful. I also, you know, the thing about writing down the complaints, right? They happen so infrequently. I don't know if that's really needed. And the time that we did a surprise inspection, that was actually a customer complaint. That was not a vendor. So I'm not sure, you know, if they'd even be willing, you know, I don't know if a customer would want to do that sort of thing, because they usually just come to us in confidence and like, we'll go talk to the vendor, and then that's usually resolved right then. And it usually does not need to go to the level of like getting another inspection involved. So I guess I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know if the written complaint process is really that necessary.
But
Because I guess
maybe
the one part is
go ahead.
I want to make sure we could learn from that too, or that somehow that folks could get something from that in terms of if there is let's say someone does have a complaint, and then they can write it and feel like it was like to feel or know that it was like looked into. And again, that I suspect right now that's just kind of done through communication. If you talk to them, I mean, what a rational thing. But sometimes if that is it's one person makes the complaint, how do you make sure that if they're the tip of the iceberg and there are a bunch of other people, or that we're also worried about that, and it's like, was this actually addressed? Or that there's, again, that feels with the morale. But I hear what Stephanie Willett was saying too, in terms of it becomes an inquisition, then it becomes a really hostile environment. So I don't know exactly how to split those differences and how to do that in a way that everyone would feel okay about. So I acknowledge that's a challenge.
But
I think too, a lot of the allegations are made without evidence, right? And that's the other thing, like people talk, people get really riled up, people heard something through the grapevine, and in the next second, they're like totally convinced that somebody did something when there's like literally no evidence. And then that people get to start talking. So I think the vast majority of like complaints, which I wouldn't even necessarily categorize as that, because it's more just sort of like, you know, market talk. That is, I think, the main cause. And even if we do things like surprise inspections, you're not going to convince the people that were already saying all these things without evidence. So that's another probably philosophical question that is also embedded in this as well.
Well, actually, maybe relate to that in terms of what Lisa was saying with the written thing, in terms of it's like a process where instead of just talking, it'd be like, well, if you do have something here, write me up the thing that says, what's the allegation, what's the evidence for it, and then submit that as a written form, which there's a path, a process, and that goes to the market manager. The market manager then does stuff with it and then replies back to the person who lodged the formal complaint. So it's a formal complaint process versus an informal complaint process.
Well,
and that would also potentially filter out with the.
Yeah, I was going to say we already have an incident report form, so we could easily just use that if we had to without having to recreate the wheel.
I think that sounds fine. I think what I'm hearing is though that some transparency in the process, and also a way to stop the rumor mill that happens at the market would be yeah, well, I know that. Well, except Stephanie, I'm thinking about it in terms of you also teach too. And I tell students that if they're going to come in with a grade complaint, they have to write it out for me, because it makes them be more thoughtful about their grade complaint. And that's fine. We talk about it together, but the process of having to think through it helps them also think about why they're lodging the complaint. So anyways, that's the place. But what I hear, I'm thinking is that general goals for what producer only looks like, why it's important, maybe some sort of process for complaint, and then thinking about the document identifying where things are too specific. And my suggestion is that could you put that together, and then also the process of doing a subcommittee, because I've read those guidelines, but they're out of my head right now. And then just to inform us what's going to happen for next meeting, and then start moving forward on the subcommittee.
I'm pretty sure you just have to vote it into existence, as far as I know.
Okay, so the question is, do we want to do that now, or do we want to get more documentation to Stephanie to revise the information as we've been talking about, and then vote it in next meeting? So I'd like to hear from the other commissioners if they have any ideas.
I would be for just voting it in now. I mean, why not? Unless we're not sure that we want to do it. Seems like it'd be nice to just keep it moving along.
Okay, do
Yeah,
we
I
need,
agree. I think it's a complicated enough thing too. I agree.
Stephanie Stauffer, do we need to set any goals for this subcommittee? I mean, it seems like it should have some guidelines. It's not just like we're creating a subcommittee to review and make suggestions on the producer only rules.
Sounds good.
Okay. So so you'll write that up in the notes then.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I guess we have a motion to create a subcommittee to review the producer only rules and guidelines for the Ann Arbor Farmers Market. Could I have someone approve that motion?
I approve.
And second,
I agree.
can raise, okay.
I second.
And
Third, fourth.
everybody is, I think everybody's raised their hands, so we'll say that motion's carried. And you'll update us on the subcommittee. So and I'd like not only about what the subcommittee is doing, but then just some general information on who will be on the subcommittee too. It doesn't have to be specific names, but if you say, you know, inviting in several vendors to cover these issues like meat and flowers and plants, that would be perfect.
Stephanie and Jeff, do you want to help with recruitment of folks to the subcommittee?
Definitely.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff, but you're in the hot seat. Cool.
All righty, since we've only got 35 more minutes, I'd like to hear from the commissioners whether we should talk about the annual stalls, specifically related to the artisans, especially since there was just move up that happened, or should we do the seniority transfer process? Which do you think is more, one of these has to be tabled because I don't think we're going to get through them both, but I won't say has to be, but I'd like your ideas on what the priorities should be.
It seems like the seniority or the change of seniority one might be a little simpler. We might be able to resolve it more quickly. So my vote would be to try and address that, see if we can get through it.
All righty. So Stephanie, do you want to summarize the issues for us?
Yes, so we have a very involved transfer of seniority process. It has three main components. The first being in case of vendor death, what happens, who is able to take over, the process by which they can transfer that seniority of the business to a family member. There's also what happens when a vendor retires. And then the last one is if someone is selling a business. So already in the rules, there's those three different things. And, you know, I think most of it's fine. For me, though, the main issues I really thought were like the day limit, because a lot of these things need to be done within 30 days, within 60 days. And especially in case of bereavement, I feel like that's a little too quick for a 60-day turnaround to have an application where people may not be sure about, if people are continuing. And I thought that that was a little bit, people have a lot of other things going on, and a lot of the thinking behind this is, we do have a vendor who's very ill. And once they found out about their illness diagnosis, the first thing they said to us were like, well, we need to make sure that this is a person, we're gonna have the 3-year thing in place. So they were like trying to be very much by the rules. And although I appreciate that, it also sent sort of a strange message to me. It's like they weren't even thinking about their own health. They were more worried about losing their seniority. So I didn't want to perpetuate that, but I think mostly for me, all the questions I had was, should we make it a longer turnaround time than either the 30 days or 60 days to apply for transfer that is currently in the rules.
And extending it seems to make total sense. I have no problem with that. But do you have an estimate or an idea of what seems reasonable for 6 months, a year?
I mean, I thought in terms of the bereavement, I thought that 90 days would be fine, just giving an additional month. 3 months instead of 2 months. We can even go longer. I'm not sure. So that one is for that. And then in terms of the retirement, it's got to be 30 days within the date of retirement as well. So I think maybe we could bump that one up to 60. Because again, there might be a lot of extra things going on, and 30 days goes by very quickly, especially during the season. So that was my main sort of feedback that I had on that. And the same thing, maybe just change anything that was 30 to 60 days and change anything that was 60 days to 90 days. And that was my entire idea about that as of right now.
That sounds fine to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And it seems like there's always an opportunity for communication anyways, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Because again, too, some people are really great on email, can do it really quickly. Other people, we have to wait for the mail. There's other things going on. People have to wait for sales of properties potentially to go through. So there's a lot of things that could happen. So I think that's relatively simple. So do we need to vote on that as a change, or can we just say that's good? I'm not sure.
sounds like we have unanimous consent.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so
I
too.
think so, yeah.
All right, great.
Do the guidelines need any sort of statement about if you're having problems meeting these deadlines to communicate with the market manager? To open that door, or do you not want to worry about it?
Let me see if it says something already. I think there's always a case that if they can't make it, that they can submit something to the community service administrator. But let me double check. Or maybe that's just an appeal if they don't go through. Sorry, I'm trying to read quickly.
I think
Yeah.
there might just be something for getting your application in on
appeal.
time, but not
Yeah.
for.
Yep, I think you're right.
Senior.
Yep, yeah, we can add something like that too. That's just, if special consideration is needed, let the market manager know, or something like that.
I think that sounds great. Stephanie brought up though another time period, which is the sales and maintaining seniority at if a farm is the ownership of a farm is being transferred, and that I think in the guidelines does say that that person needs to work on the farm for 3 years.
Sure, we're not changing that part.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to ask about that.
Yep, no, I was just giving that as an example because I was sort of like, wow, this person is so worried about this that their serious health problem is taking a back seat.
Yeah.
To worrying about that was more the main reason I brought that up.
And I don't want an answer for this right now, but I just wanted to ask because I know there's a couple vendors that are grandfathered in at 4 stalls. And does that transfer of seniority mean that it transfers all 4 stalls, or does it revert to the 3 stalls? And you don't have to answer this now, but I just wanted to bring it up as another issue, the transfer of seniority.
It reverts to 3 stalls.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And
Okay.
that's really only 2 vendors at this, or 3,
Yeah.
I guess. Good point. So that would be in play for one of the vendors.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. Good. Thank
Quick,
you.
there you go. Nice and quick.
Good. Thanks.
We're being
All right.
productive now.
So now we're to the artisans market, and I want to see if we can get some progress made in about 15 minutes on this one, so that we have time for the rest of the agenda. Where I remember us letting off last time at the September meeting, so there had been approval of the annual artisans vendors could have 2 stalls. And then what we had talked about was limiting the number of stalls for annual artisans vendors, that we talked about a percentage of stalls and decided that it would probably be better to set a number limit on those stalls. So that's where Jeff and Stephanie, you were at the meeting. That's what I remember us talking about. Does that sound right? I'm sorry, Peter. I see Peter nodding his head. So, all right.
Yep.
So, Stephanie, with the move up, how many stalls are assigned to annual artisan vendors? Out of the
I
142?
believe, I looked at it earlier today. I think, one second. I believe it's 17. Because there was like the third, so the person who got her seniority was the 13th person based on the special situation from before. And then if we wanted to give them the capacity to get a second stall, that would be 18 total. And then the other producer was a hot sauce vendor. They got their seniority. Who grows a bunch of his own peppers, actually. But I think that's what we had talked about.
Okay, so I guess that's there's 2 issues there. There's one, how many stalls could go to annual artisan vendors, and then for an artisan that moves into from a daily to an annual status, do we also want to give them the option of having 2 stalls if there are stalls available that are allotted to artisans?
Well, in this case of Dana, I mean, she was already within the 13 from before, and she does actually use 2 stalls. So it would be creating a whole nother situation again, potentially, if we didn't bump it to 18 just to give her the second stall she uses. But then remember, if we kept it based on the previous, once there would have to be another artisan, or would it have to be 2 artisans to retire then before another artisan moved up? If we had a sort of blending of the current and past edits.
Thoughts? I just did a little math, and taking it up to 18 stalls out of all the annual stalls we'd be at 13% of the stalls assigned to artisans.
And there's only 20 total artisans in the entire market. So that would mean only 7 of them don't have their annual status. And currently, after this particular move up, Stone Cloud, she's sort of on the edge of retirement, although she might come back just with Pawpaws in the future. But say she retires, then we still have the first at least 3 dailies in the list are artisans after that, but none of them use 2 stalls.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about last time was adding in the merging of the lists was going to make things complicated. So I think if people are okay with it, I'd like to just resolve number of stalls that artisans, do we want to make it standard so that as an artisan becomes an annual vendor, that they are always allowed to ask for 2 stalls? Or do we want to create a 2-tiered system again, which means we're going to be revisiting this issue probably within the next year or 2? And then how many stalls should be assigned to artisan vendors at the market?
I think at least my understanding too is that if we have artisans, annual artisans, then can get assigned 2 stalls. Is just kind of a change in policy. It seems like in going forward, that seems like that was my understanding of kind of where we were going last time, and that seems reasonable and also doesn't create
blood. So
Yep, and in terms of the artisans that are daily vendors, only one of them uses 2 stalls. So of the remaining 7, that is, there's only one that uses 2.
All
So
right,
then-
So it sort of may be a non-issue moving forward. But Stephanie, you wanted to say something?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I'm leaning toward, making it, so in the future, artisans can request a second stall annually. That makes sense to me, or like Lisa said, we might have to revisit it again.
Okay, so I hear consensus on that in terms of the rules. And then the other issue is how many stalls should be assigned to be used by annual artisan vendors.
Well, wasn't that the question, is should we integrate the list or should we set a number of stalls? Is that, or are we like, I'm confused.
So I thought last time we had talked about maybe what we should do is talk about whether we wanted to have a number of stalls assigned. We had also talked a little bit about, do we want to say up to a percentage of stalls assigned to annual artisan vendors? But what I remember us coming to was saying it might be better to do a number of stalls, and that we would table the merging of the lists because that was going to make things a lot more complicated. And we still have to decide the makeup of the annual vendors at the market anyways. And then the merging of the lists could be something that is based on those, that what we decide in terms of number of stalls at the market. Because if we set the number of stalls for artisans at a certain limit, then there can still be move up of producers, and the artisans need to wait until an artisan retires from one of those artisan vendor assigned stalls. Does that make sense?
I wonder if a third possibility of there that might be even clearer, because if artisans can be 1 or 2 stalls, then if we have the total number of stalls, and if someone says I need 1, but then I need 2, then that it is confusing. So a different one would be to have a fixed number of artisan annual vendors. And so that no more annual artisan vendors would be listed in the annual artisan vendor until one retires. And then another one on the list who has seniority would move up into that list and have the option of 1 or 2. So it wouldn't be on a per stall basis. It would be on just a slot for being an annual artisan vendor. And that would maintain the mix without having, and not get confusing if someone shrinks down their process, grows it up, or there's 1 annual stall, but I need 2, or I'll take 1, but maybe I'll get 2, or I don't know. I don't know how that way. And I know some of the vendors never need two. A lot of them could always use two, but can have one and find another. And so like, at least I don't know how that seems complicated to me. I'm not the one who deals with it. So, but that would be a simpler way to do it.
So yeah, I think there's in essence 3 options based on what everyone is saying. It's either remove the discussion of numbers from the rules right now and then revisit the blending of the lists later and just have it say annual artisan vendors can have up to 2 stalls. The other option is keep a specific number of how many stalls that vendors can have who are annual artisans, and then constrain who can move up based on that. And then the third option, which I don't think we're ready to talk about right now, would be blending the lists and getting rid of any caps on vendors. Is that sort of a summary of what we've been talking about? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
I think the having a certain number of artisans being able to be vendors or annuals, and then they can take up to 2 stalls instead of just posing a stall limit sort of makes sense to me. Also, I'm keeping it maybe at the current number for now also seems to make sense, because I don't know if we were to increase it, like what that number would be or what that number would look like.
So Stephanie, sorry, I don't remember numbers very well. How many of the annual vendors are artisans? How many artisan annual vendors are there?
There's 13, remember, because that was the special magic number that you all had figured out a couple of years ago. So that one person retired and took that 13th spot.
Okay.
So if we were to give the 4 additional stalls that were rewarded, that would bring us up to 17, plus 1 would be 18.
Okay. So
in terms of stalls being used by permanent annual artisans at the current moment.
So we could have a baker's dozen of annual art.
Just
Still
like
at
as
that number 13.
yeah, as a quick reminder, like it in the rules it's 12 and
Yeah.
it was 12, and then when we voted to move it to 13, we said we will have it at 13 for the next 3 artisans, and then it will revert back to 12. So that was what the motion was a couple of years ago. I mean, we
Then
can.
does that mean we have 1 more then? Because there was just Novachkov, now Dana. Then would then that be Stephen?
No, I
Bernard?
think it was Anne was included in that 3.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I was not here for that. Okay.
Yeah. So the motion technically was to go back to 12 again after those 3. We can make a new motion and make it 13 permanently. If now that we're doing it again, and I mean I wouldn't be opposed to that, but because 12 and 13 there's not a huge difference in my mind. But yeah, that would just be a new motion.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that too, that we had it as kind of a floating temporary rise and then coming back to the dozen. And so that actually would then keep it back to kind of where the rules were with that, but with the extension of two annual stalls are possible for that. So. And
But it would have been 16 instead of 12. Right. Because before it was only 1 stall per person. Now we added 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that's why the 18 corresponds to it being 13.
Okay,
With only
yeah.
5 people getting a second stall.
Got it.
Fuzzy logic, this math.
But it seems like from what I'm hearing with this, it seems like the merging of the lists is kind of I don't hear a lot of excitement for the merging of the lists. And so it sounds like it's either a fixed stall assignment, number of stalls, or a fixed number of annual artisan vendors.
I think the merging of the list is a more complicated issue that's going to take a longer time to have a conversation. So the idea was that we make some progress, which we've made progress on, that annual artisans can request 2 stalls if they so desire. So, and then there's the other issue of, it sounds like we have consensus that there should be a cap on the number of annual vendors who are artisans. So we can just stick to what we had before, which was a temporary move up to 13, but then would revert to 12 within the time frame that we had set, or I guess we could move it also to 13, or we could shelve this issue and talk about it later too.
I mean, what I was hearing was the consensus was 13, because it makes so little sense to move it back after we're already here. Because then again, even though it is the rules, it's going to upset somebody. So let's not if we don't have to,
I think that makes sense. I think kind of going for, sometimes when making policy too, it's like you go for continuity in terms of, it's like, this is the slope we're going on. We'll not make a bend in that, but we'll lock it at that. And I think that seems reasonable.
Jeff and Stephanie, do you have any input on that as people who are at the market and have to live with the decisions?
No, I think that making it 13 permanently wouldn't harm anything and would kind of keep us going in the same trajectory in terms of like just getting us on that.
Go ahead,
All
Jeff.
I have to say about that is my job here is to represent all the annual vendors, and I am going to hear a lot about this.
Well, artisans are also annual vendors, and we're talking about.
I know. I'm just, I can't just speak for myself on all this stuff. I have to,
Sure.
Voice for everyone else.
Yeah. And I did just want to clarify that everyone impacted by this has been at the market a minimum of 27 years.
Yeah, we know.
They are all just as much a part of the market as me and Stephanie. So yes.
Thank you. All right. We're ready to speed through the last bits.
Okay, so Stephanie, because this is a change to market rules, can you write that up so that we can then have something clear to vote on for next time?
Sure. And it's also going to be folded into the process that we're sharing with council, just so that we can not have to do that 2 to 3 separate times. And
right. So just so that we have everything so that we can see it is if you could write up the artisan thing, and then just the changes to the seniority process, which we've talked about, but just so you have the commission set of eyes to also see it, and then we'll vote on it, and you can go to council and say, I have a unanimous vote on these things. So for next meeting, if you could just draft those sections.
You don't
up
think
for us.
We can vote on it right now?
I don't know. How does everybody feel?
I think we potentially could. I'm fine with voting on it. I know usually you vote on something where you actually have the written final document in front of you, versus, we can vote on the idea that I think everyone agrees. It sounds like that pushing it to 13 as that number, I hear consent there, but in terms of having a final formal, this is the written thing that we've got, this is what we approved, versus did we, I don't know, that at least from my recollection of how the process usually works is that then having a formal, this is going to be the text, we approve the text that goes then to council.
It's just that it would be literally 3 sentences. You know, it would be one
Well,
that
but-
says, put the word 2 instead of 1. Would be another that says the word 18 instead of 12. And it would be another change that says 13 instead of 12. Nothing else would be changed at all.
Yeah,
So, you know, we're supposed to be doing process here. So, Peter, you're the expert on the process. So,
I mean, I can show it to you on like with the screen sharing. I was working on this earlier today. That's why I know the specific details to the sentence about it. But it's okay. You know, it's your commission, so do what you see fit.
I guess the question is, do we need speed to get this so that we can get it before next time, or is this a timely issue?
I think it would be helpful because the longer we wait on this is the longer we have to wait on all the other rule changes going through to council. Because it doesn't make sense, because the process is like I have to share everything with the city attorney, they have to go through it, then it has to go through the city services administrator, and that's even before it can even go to council to be voted on. So, you know, I think it would be helpful considering this is like the third meeting. We've talked about this too. But again, it's up to you all.
Yeah, I think that I guess I would feel more comfortable if it were something just that we had it was in the record, in the notes with this particular text. This is the final form, it's in our records, it's all above board, we've got it all clear. I think that would feel more comfortable to me, at least, as one of the commission. So
I
Sure.
agree. I agree.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, great. All right, thank you all for your hard work. So let's run through the next items on the agenda, which are facilities and staffing updates.
All right, I'll be as fast as I can. So biggest facility update is they finally power washed the roof about, I believe it was last Monday. So that was very exciting because we had been waiting, I don't know, 3 years for that with the pandemic and everything. Other facility things, there really isn't any other than that. That's the big one. We did have some issues with the sinks at Market. I think there was a special event last week, and I think someone poured something into the women's bathroom sinks that they should not have. So they sort of overflowed during Market or not fully filling out, but they were clogged on Saturday. We had to close them, but that is all fixed. There was also extraneous signs, stop signs and stuff hit that have been fixed. So everything is fixed except for we're still waiting for Park Ops to fix the light in the men's bathroom stall. And in terms of staffing, Alex, we're hoping will be back in 2 weeks. It all depends on the slowness or fastness with which his HR paperwork can go through. And the other update I have is that we've had a lot of volunteers helping. Ironically, last Saturday we had a bunch of extra volunteers, but the Saturday before that we were very short-staffed and struggling. So, you know, when it rains, it pours. But luckily, we're in a good place for additional staff in the next couple weeks before Alex gets back. And that's all I got for that item.
The next thing is the events.
Well, we had our final food truck rally of the year last night. We were very concerned about the coldness. But hey, you know, the sun came out right before the end of Market, of course, 10 minutes before the end of Market earlier in the day. And it was pretty well attended. Obviously not the same as a summer one, but still really good turnout given the weather. With that said, we are planning on having a small Halloween themed Wednesday trick or treat for kids next week, 10 to 1 during Market. We reached out to Give 365 and they are as well sort of overextended. So they did not think that they could pull off a Saturday event. So we're going to do the Wednesday instead, and that's 10 to 1. There's going to be games, activities, costumes, candy, all that good stuff for kids and everyone of all ages who is in the Halloween spirit.
Great,
And I
thanks
think
for
that's all
organizing
that I have for events for this month.
Great.
That were specific to us. We were involved in the so-called local food fest last week, but that was an Office of Sustainability and Innovation event that we helped partner with. So again, also a very cold day last Thursday.
Great.
But that's it.
Construction updates?
Well, they have been telling us that the 4th Avenue intersection at Catherine was going to be opening for probably the last 3 weeks. It's still not open. There was a water main break in the midst of everything that set some things back. So they said next week, hopefully soon it will be back open. But I know that, and they said southbound Main would probably open next week as well. So we have been getting feedback from some customers that it's been very difficult for them to get to the market. Although, on the day that was the most difficult was also one of our busiest Saturdays in a really long time, weeks ago. So go figure. And we are still not sure of the date exactly when the 330 Detroit Street development will start. But they did put up a construction explainer sign about it. So I would assume it's sometime coming up in November. And that's all I have on construction updates.
Okay, great. So we're on to new business, non-agenda items. I just want to mention that I was at the local food fest, and it struck me that this was a great time to also talk to Missy Stoltz of the Office of Sustainability, and asked her if the farmers market, and thinking about the infrastructure project, which we often call the winterization project, could be folded in to some sustainability initiatives within the city, and that I would be excited to explore those possibilities. And she said she was supportive. So Stephanie, I know she was going to talk to you about it too. And I think everybody's been busy too. So I think if she also told me that there's a fair amount of money floating around the city right now, so it might be a good time to bring up some of those issues. And I just dream about the day when the farmers market could be one of the showcases of sustainability here in the city of Ann Arbor, not only for environmental things, but what the market does so well, which is economic and social sustainability. In terms of local food. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up, that I don't know if the conversation will lead anywhere, but I did.
Yeah, I have not heard from her yet about that, but I will say the market is the center of sustainability in the city and always has been. So
we just need to get the city to invest in that center of sustainability. So for those of us who are taxpayers in town, all we can do is rattle the cages. So I think we need to rattle them hard and loudly and frequently right now. So if anybody else wants to join me in this mission of rattling cages, let's do it. So, all right. Any other new business? Okay. So we're now on to our second public comment.
All right. Is there anyone that would like to give a comment to the commission in this public comment period? I'm seeing at least one other person on the call. Let's see if they end up raising their hand. We'll give them a few moments. All right. I am not seeing a hand raised.
All right, so it's 7:01 and we can adjourn.
All right.
All right, so Stephanie will get us the written stuff about the changes, and then just you guys will work on the subcommittee for the producer only rules. For next time, look forward to getting a report on it.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so
Great.
much.
Thanks everybody for your hard
everyone.
work.
A
Bye.
lot done. So
See you at the market.
See you at market.
Okay. See you. Thank you.
Bye.